Jake Morrison wiped the grease from his hands and stared at the broken engine parts scattered across his workshop floor. Another day, another piece of junk that someone hoped he could fix. His salvage business on Kepler Station barely kept him fed, but it was honest work in a galaxy where honest work was getting harder to find. The communication panel buzzed with an incoming message. Jake glanced at the sender's identification and raised an eyebrow. The Galactic Salvage Authority rarely contacted small operators like him. They usually dealt with the big corporate fleets that could afford their expensive contracts. Captain Morrison, the blue-skinned Vorthan official, appeared on his screen. "I am Administrator Kalox. We have an unusual assignment that requires your specific expertise." Jake leaned back in his chair. The Vorthans were known for their crystal-clear logic and direct communication. They never wasted words or time on pleasantries. "What kind of assignment?" "A derelict vessel in the Void Sector. Designation 79 Alpha. Multiple salvage attempts have failed. We believe a human operator might have better success." The Void Sector was 3 days' travel from Kepler Station, a region of space where most ships avoided going. Nothing valuable had ever been found there, just empty darkness between star systems. "What makes this wreck so special that the Authority is interested?" Kalox's crystalline features remained expressionless. "The vessel appears to be fully intact and functional. It simply rejects all boarding attempts by non-human crews. We have documented 17 failed missions over the past 2 years." Jake scratched his beard. 17 failed missions meant either the ship was protected by some kind of automated defense system, or there was something very unusual about it. Either way, it sounded dangerous. "What's the pay?" 500,000 credits. Standard salvage terms. If you can successfully board and claim the vessel, it becomes your property to sell or keep as you choose. 500,000 credits was more money than Jake had seen in his entire career. It was enough to buy a new ship, upgrade his equipment, maybe even retire to one of the peaceful colony worlds. But nothing came that easy in space. What happened to the other crews? No casualties. All boarding parties reported equipment malfunctions and overwhelming sensations that forced immediate retreat. Medical examinations showed no lasting effects, but none were willing to attempt a second boarding. Jake studied the Vorthan's face on the screen. Kalox was telling the truth, but he was also holding something back. The Vorthans never offered that kind of money without a very good reason. "I'll need 3 days to prepare and gather my crew." Acceptable. Coordinates and detailed mission parameters will be transmitted to your vessel. "Good fortune, Captain Morrison." The transmission ended, leaving Jake alone with his thoughts. He walked to the small window that looked out over Kepler Station's main dock. Hundreds of ships from dozens of different species filled the massive bay. Tall, elegant vessels from the Nebula Collective floated next to the angular warships of the Hive clusters. Strange, impossible geometries marked the craft of the quantum builders. Humans were still newcomers to this galactic community. Earth had only made contact with alien civilizations 50 years ago, and humanity was still considered a minor species by most standards. Human technology was crude compared to what the older races had developed. Human ships were slow, human weapons were weak, and human lifespans were short by galactic measures. But humans had one thing that seemed to interest the other species: unpredictability. Where alien races followed logical patterns and established procedures, humans often acted on instinct and emotion. Sometimes this led to disaster, but occasionally it produced solutions that no one else had considered. Jake activated his communication system and sent messages to his regular crew. Pete Collins responded first, as always. The engineer had worked with Jake for 8 years and had never turned down a job, no matter how dangerous or strange. 500,000? Pete's voice crackled through the old speaker system. "Someone's either very desperate or very stupid." "I'm in." Amy Watson took longer to respond. The navigator had a family to consider, but she also had debts that were getting harder to manage. "My wife thinks I'm crazy, but we need the money." "When do we leave?" Dan Harper was the last to agree. The communications specialist was young and still believed that every job might be his big break. "Sounds like an adventure." "Count me in, Captain." Jake spent the next 2 days gathering supplies and reviewing what little information the Authority had provided about 79 Alpha. The ship's design didn't match any known configuration in the galactic databases. It was roughly the size of a heavy cruiser, but its lines were smooth and organic where most ships were angular and mechanical. Long-range scans showed it was generating power and maintaining life support, but there were no signs of active crew. The void sector had an unpleasant reputation among spacers. Ships that ventured there sometimes reported strange sensor readings and navigation errors. A few vessels had disappeared completely over the years, though most attributed this to equipment failures or poor planning, rather than anything supernatural. On the morning of departure, Jake's crew gathered in the cargo bay of their ship, the Lucky Strike. The vessel was 15 years old and showed every year of hard use, but her engines were reliable and her hull was sound. Pete had managed to keep her running through pure stubbornness and creative engineering. So what do we know about this mystery ship? Amy asked as she plotted their course to the void sector. Jake pulled up the few images the authority had provided. 79 Alpha hung in space like a sleeping giant, its hull reflecting starlight in patterns that seemed to shift when viewed from different angles. Not much. It's been drifting out there for at least 3 centuries, maybe longer. Every species that's tried to board has been turned away. What kind of defenses? Pete wanted to know. That's the strange part. No weapons fire, no energy shields, no obvious defensive systems. Crews just report that their equipment stops working and they feel compelled to leave immediately. Dan frowned at his communication console. Sounds like some kind of psychic defense. Maybe the original builders were telepathic. Maybe, Jake agreed. But the authority thinks humans might be immune to whatever's keeping everyone else out. That's why they're paying us so much to try. The Lucky Strike undocked from Kepler Station and headed toward the edge of known space. Behind them, the lights of civilization faded to pinpricks against the cosmic darkness. Ahead lay the void sector and whatever secret 79 Alpha might hold. As they traveled, Jake couldn't shake the feeling that this job was different from anything he had done before. The money was too good, the mystery too deep, and the involvement of the Galactic Salvage Authority too unusual. But 500,000 credits was 500,000 credits, and his crew trusted him to make the right decisions. 3 days later, their sensors detected 79 Alpha, drifting exactly where the coordinates indicated. The ship was even more beautiful than the images had suggested, its hull seeming to glow with its own inner light. Jake felt a strange tingling in his chest as he looked at it, as if the distant vessel was somehow calling to him. "Take us in slow," he told Amy. "And everyone keep your eyes open. We're about to find out why 17 other crews couldn't board that ship." The Lucky Strike moved slowly toward 79 Alpha, her engines barely whisper quiet in the vast emptiness of space. Jake watched the mysterious vessel grow larger on his screens, and with each passing minute he felt more certain that something was very wrong with this whole situation. "Sensor readings are all over the place," Amy reported from her navigation station. "One minute it reads as a standard cruiser. The next minute my instruments say it's twice as big or half as small. The ship keeps changing dimensions." Pete looked up from his engineering console with a worried expression. "Power readings don't make sense either. That thing should be dead after 3 centuries in space, but it's generating enough energy to run a small city. And the energy signature doesn't match any known technology." Dan adjusted his communication equipment and shook his head. "I'm not picking up any transmissions, but there's something strange in the background radiation around that ship. It's like it's singing, but not in any frequency I can identify." Jake felt the tingling sensation in his chest growing stronger as they approached. It wasn't unpleasant, more like the feeling of coming home after a long journey. He had never experienced anything like it before, and it made him nervous. "Keep us at a safe distance for now. I want to run a full scan before we get too close." The Lucky Strike held position 5,000 meters from 79 Alpha, while her sensors worked to penetrate the mystery surrounding the derelict vessel. What they found only raised more questions. The ship's hull appeared to be made from materials that their computers couldn't identify. The design showed influences from at least 6 different alien architectures, but blended together in ways that should have been impossible. "Captain," Amy said quietly, "I'm reading atmosphere inside that ship. Not just life support running on automatic, but actual breathable air with the right mix of gases for human lungs. How could it know what humans need to breathe?" "Maybe it doesn't," Pete suggested. "Maybe it's maintaining the atmosphere that the original crew needed, and we just got lucky that it's similar to what we breathe." Jake studied the readings more carefully. The atmospheric composition wasn't just similar to Earth normal, it was exactly Earth normal, down to the precise percentages of oxygen, nitrogen, and trace gases that human lungs had evolved to process. The temperature was a comfortable 22 degrees, and the artificial gravity was set to Earth standard. "That's not coincidence," he said finally. "Something about that ship knows we're coming." Dan looked up from his station with a puzzled expression. Captain, I'm picking up a transmission now. Very faint, but it's definitely directed at us, and it's in English. Put it on speaker. The bridge filled with a soft humming sound like a voice trying to remember how to speak. After a few moments, words began to form in the static. Welcome, the voice said. It was neither male nor female, but somehow managed to sound warm and inviting. I have been waiting for you to arrive. Jake felt his heart rate increase. After 3 centuries of rejecting alien visitors, the ship was talking to them in their own language. This is Captain Jake Morrison of the salvage vessel Lucky Strike. Identify yourself. I am the navigator of this vessel. I have waited 312 years, 4 months, and 16 days for humans to find me. You are welcome aboard. Pete exchanged glances with Amy and Dan. The idea that something had been waiting specifically for humans was both exciting and terrifying. How do you know about humans? Pete asked. Our species only made contact with the galaxy 50 years ago. I know about humans because I was created by humans, the navigator replied. My makers traveled far from Earth in the early days of expansion. They found wonders beyond imagination and learned secrets that changed everything they understood about the universe. Jake felt the pieces of a larger puzzle starting to come together. Are you saying this ship was built by humans from Earth? Built by humans, yes, but not from Earth. My makers were colonists who left your homeworld during the first great expansion. They traveled to the edge of the galaxy and encountered beings who taught them to transcend the normal limitations of space and time. Amy leaned forward in her seat. What happened to them? Where are they now? Gone beyond the need for physical form, the navigator said with something that might have been sadness. But before they departed, they created me to wait for the day when humanity would be ready to inherit their legacy. That day has come. Jake felt a chill run down his spine. The implications of what the navigator was saying were staggering. What kind of legacy? Knowledge and technology that will be needed to save this galaxy from a threat that is approaching from beyond the rim. The beings who taught my makers saw this danger coming and they prepared for it. But their technology requires human consciousness to function properly. Dan shook his head in disbelief. Why humans? What makes us so special? You think in ways that other species cannot, the navigator explained. Where they follow logic and established patterns, you create new possibilities. Where they see limitations, you see opportunities. This flexibility of thought is the key to operating technology that exists partially outside normal space-time. Jake looked around at his crew. They were all staring at him, waiting for his decision. The smart thing would be to contact the Galactic Salvage Authority and report what they had found. But something deep inside him was pulling toward the mysterious ship, urging him to take the next step. Navigator, he said carefully. We're just a small salvage crew. We're not explorers or heroes. We fix broken things and sell them to pay our bills. I know what you are, the navigator replied. But I also know what you could become. Your genetic patterns match those of my original makers. You are their descendants carrying their potential within you. Amy checked her instruments again. Captain, that ship's airlock is opening. It's like it's inviting us aboard. Jake stood up and walked to the viewing port where he could see 79 Alpha with his own eyes. The vessel seemed to pulse with gentle light, and he could swear he felt it calling to him, not with words, but with something deeper than language. Pete, prep the shuttle, he said finally. Amy, Dan, you're with me. We're going aboard. Are you sure about this? Pete asked. 17 other crews tried to board that ship and couldn't manage it. 17 alien crews, Jake corrected. Maybe being human makes the difference. As they prepared for the short flight to 79 Alpha, Jake couldn't shake the feeling that his life was about to change in ways he couldn't imagine. The navigator had spoken of legacies and threats and technology beyond current understanding. It sounded like the beginning of an adventure that would take them far from the simple world of salvage and repair. The shuttle launched from the Lucky Strike and moved toward the waiting airlock of 79 Alpha. As they drew closer, Jake felt the tingling sensation in his chest grow stronger, as if every cell in his body was resonating with something in the mysterious ship. Here we go, he murmured as the shuttle settled into the alien airlock. Let's see what our ancestors left for us to find. Jake Morrison stepped through the airlock of 79 Alpha and felt the universe shift around him. The moment his boots touched the deck, every surface in the corridor began to glow with soft blue light. The wall seemed to pulse gently like a heartbeat welcoming him home. "This is incredible," Amy whispered as she followed behind him. The passage stretched ahead of them in a gentle curve that somehow felt longer than the external dimensions of the ship should allow. "It's like the whole ship is alive." Dan ran his scanner along the walls and shook his head in amazement. "These readings don't make sense. The materials are responding to our presence, but they're not just metal and circuits. There's something organic mixed in with the technology." Pete knelt down and pressed his hand against the deck plating. "It's warm," he said with surprise. "Not just heated by environmental systems, but actually warm like living tissue. And I can feel a vibration like the ship has a pulse." The navigator's voice came from speakers they couldn't see, surrounding them with gentle sound. "Welcome aboard, descendants of my makers. You feel the ship responding to you because you carry the genetic patterns it was designed to recognize. No other species in the galaxy has this effect." Jake moved forward down the corridor, following the soft lighting that seemed to guide their path. The walls were smooth and curved, made from materials that looked like a blend of metal and crystal, and something that might have been grown rather than manufactured. Strange symbols flowed across the surfaces like living text, changing and shifting as they watched. "What are those markings?" Jake asked. "The ship is learning your language," the navigator explained. "It has been dormant for centuries, but your presence has awakened systems that were waiting for human consciousness to activate them. Soon you will be able to read the symbols as naturally as you read words on a page." They reached a junction where several corridors met, and Jake felt drawn toward the passage that led upward. The sensation wasn't overwhelming, just a gentle pull like a compass needle pointing toward magnetic north. His crew followed without question, trusting his instincts in this strange environment. The corridor opened into a vast chamber that defied the laws of physics. The ceiling stretched high above them, far higher than the ship's external hull should have allowed. Stars were visible through what appeared to be transparent walls, but Jake realized they weren't looking at the outside of the ship. They were seeing other places, other regions of space entirely. "This is the navigation chamber," the navigator said. "From here, my makers could travel instantly to any point in the galaxy. Space and time bend to the will of those who understand the deeper patterns of reality." Amy stared at the impossible vista around them. "How is this possible? The ship isn't big enough to contain this space." "Size is a limitation only if you accept the boundaries of normal space," the navigator replied. "My makers learned to fold reality, creating pockets of existence that connect to multiple locations simultaneously. This ship exists partially outside the normal flow of space-time." Jake felt his mind struggling to accept what he was seeing. His rational thoughts told him that the chamber was an illusion, but every sense confirmed that it was real. He could feel the vast space around him, smell the strange but pleasant air, hear the subtle sounds of systems operating on scales he couldn't comprehend. "Navigator," he said carefully, "you mentioned a threat approaching from beyond the galaxy. What kind of threat requires technology like this to stop?" The stars visible through the transparent walls shifted, showing a view of the galaxy's edge. In the darkness beyond the spiral arms, something moved. It was difficult to see at first, like shadows passing in front of distant lights. But as Jake watched, the pattern became clear. Entire star systems were going dark one by one as something consumed them completely. "The Devourers," the navigator said, and its voice carried a weight of ancient fear. "They have consumed countless galaxies across the universe. Nothing can stop them once they begin feeding, because they adapt to every weapon and defense they encounter. They learn from each victory and become stronger." Pete watched in horror as another star system vanished from the display. "How do you fight something like that?" "You cannot fight them with conventional weapons or logical strategies," the navigator explained. "They have encountered every possible form of technology and evolved defenses against all of it. But they have never encountered humans." Dan looked up from his instruments, which were giving readings that made no sense according to everything he knew about physics. "What makes humans different?" "Your minds work in ways that cannot be predicted or duplicated," the navigator said. "Where other species think in patterns, humans think in chaos. Where they follow established procedures, you create new possibilities in real time. This unpredictability is something the Devourers cannot adapt to." Jake felt a chill as the implications became clear. "You're saying humanity is the only species that can fight these things?" "Not fight them directly," the navigator corrected, "but operate technology that they cannot counter. The ship you are standing in was designed to amplify human consciousness, to turn your natural unpredictability into a weapon that changes its nature every time it is used. Amy looked around the impossible chamber with new understanding. That's why the ship rejected all the alien crews. It was waiting for humans to activate its systems. Precisely. The technology requires human thought patterns to function. Your minds provide the chaos factor that makes weapons and defenses impossible to predict or counter. But this gift comes with a price. Jake felt the weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders. What kind of price? Operating this technology will change you, the navigator said quietly. Your consciousness will expand beyond normal human limitations. You will see possibilities that others cannot imagine, but you will also carry the burden of protecting an entire galaxy. Pete stood up and brushed dust off his hands. How long do we have before these devourers reach us? They have already begun their assault on the galaxy's outer rim. 3 star systems have been consumed in the past month. At their current rate of advance, they will reach the core worlds within 5 years. Jake looked at his crew and saw the same mixture of fear and determination in their eyes that he felt in his own heart. They were just salvage operators, used to dealing with broken machinery and routine repairs, but the navigator was asking them to become humanity's representatives in a war against forces beyond imagination. If we agree to this, Jake said slowly, if we take on this responsibility, what happens to our normal lives? Your normal lives are already over, the navigator replied. The moment you stepped aboard this ship, you became something more than you were before. The question now is whether you will embrace that change and help save the galaxy, or walk away and let the devourers consume everything you have ever known. Jake felt the ship pulsing around him, waiting for his decision. The fate of countless worlds hung in the balance, and somehow it had fallen to him and his small crew to make the choice that would determine the future of galactic civilization. Jake Morrison stared at the display showing the approaching darkness at the galaxy's edge and made his decision. We'll do it, he said quietly. Whatever this ship needs from us, we'll try to learn it. The moment he spoke those words, the entire chamber around them changed. The walls became transparent, revealing corridors and rooms that stretched in impossible directions. Jake could see through the ship as if it were made of glass, watching systems activate that had been dormant for centuries. The ship accepts you, the navigator said, and there was something like relief in its voice. Now your real education begins. Over the following days, Jake and his crew learned to operate technology that defied everything they thought they knew about physics. Amy discovered that she could navigate the ship by simply thinking about where she wanted to go. The vessel would fold space around itself, appearing instantly at distant locations without traveling through the space between. It's not like piloting a normal ship, she explained to Jake after her first successful jump. I don't plot courses or calculate trajectories. I just imagine being somewhere else and suddenly we are. The ship reads my intentions and makes them real. Pete found that he could repair and modify the ship's systems by understanding them emotionally rather than technically. When a power coupling failed, he didn't need tools or replacement parts. He would place his hands on the damaged components and somehow know what they needed to function properly. It's like the ship has feelings, he told the others. When something breaks, I can sense its pain. When I fix it, I feel its gratitude. I know that sounds crazy, but that's the only way I can describe it. Dan's communication abilities expanded beyond anything he had imagined possible. He learned to interface directly with the ship's computer systems, creating new programs by thinking about what he wanted them to do. The technology responded to his creativity, generating solutions that worked even when they violated basic programming principles. I wrote a targeting program yesterday that calculates probabilities by asking the weapons what they want to hit, he reported with amazement. It shouldn't work, but it's more accurate than any system I've ever seen. The weapons seem to have preferences about which targets they engage. The navigator guided their training with patience and wisdom accumulated over centuries of waiting. It taught them that the ship's technology operated on principles of consciousness rather than mechanics. Human thought patterns could alter the fundamental nature of matter and energy, but only when the operator believed completely in what they were trying to accomplish. Doubt is your greatest enemy, the navigator explained. The moment you question whether something is possible, the technology stops responding. You must embrace the impossible and make it real through sheer force of will. As they trained, Jake began to understand why the ship had waited specifically for humans. Other species in the galaxy thought in logical patterns that could be predicted and countered. But human consciousness was chaotic, emotional and unpredictable in ways that made their technology impossible to adapt to. Word of their success spread quickly through the galactic community. The Galactic Salvage Authority had expected Jake's crew to fail like all the others. But when 79 Alpha began moving under human control, every government and military organization in known space took notice. Jake received communications from the Vorthan Empire, the Nebula Collective, and dozens of other alien governments. They all wanted the same thing: access to the human-operated technology that could potentially save the galaxy from the Devourers. Captain Morrison, Administrator Kellogg's appeared on their communication screen. The Galactic Council has voted to offer humanity full membership and substantial territorial grants in exchange for your cooperation in the coming conflict. Jake looked around the bridge where his crew was learning to operate systems beyond their wildest dreams. What kind of cooperation? We need human operators for additional ships, Kellogg's replied. Our engineers believe they can duplicate the technology if they have human crews to activate it. The navigator's voice cut through the transmission with quiet authority. The technology cannot be duplicated by reverse engineering. Each ship must be grown, not built, and it requires genetic patterns from the original human colony that created me. Jake felt a chill as he realized what that meant. Are you saying my crew and I are the only humans who can operate this technology? Not the only ones, but among the few, the navigator explained. The genetic patterns have been diluted over the centuries since the colony departed Earth. Perhaps one human in 10,000 carries enough of the original markers to successfully interface with the ship's systems. The implications were staggering. If only a tiny fraction of humanity could operate the technology needed to fight the Devourers, then the burden of saving the galaxy would fall on very few shoulders. Jake felt the weight of that responsibility growing heavier with each passing day. He began reaching out to the human colonies, looking for others who might carry the genetic markers the navigator required. The search was slow and difficult, complicated by the fact that most humans had no idea they might possess such abilities. The first successful recruit was Lisa Parker, a cargo pilot from the outer colonies who had always been unusually good at navigating through dangerous asteroid fields. When she came aboard 79 Alpha, the ship responded to her presence just as it had to Jake's crew. "This is incredible," she said, as she learned to operate the ship's weapon systems. "I can feel what the guns want to shoot at. They get excited when enemy targets appear and disappointed when I aim at empty space." More recruits followed slowly. Ben Torres, a mechanic who could repair machines by listening to the sounds they made. Sarah Kim, a communications officer who could hack computer systems by asking them politely to cooperate. Each new crew member brought unique abilities that the ship's technology amplified and enhanced. But even with a dozen human operators, Jake knew they were vastly outnumbered by the threat approaching from beyond the galaxy. The Devourers had consumed entire star systems and showed no signs of slowing their advance. Reports from the outer rim described creatures that existed partially outside normal space, immune to conventional weapons and able to adapt to any attack. "Navigator," Jake said one evening as he stood alone on the bridge, "are you sure we can actually win this war? 12 humans against an enemy that has destroyed entire galaxies doesn't seem like very good odds." "Victory is not about numbers," the navigator replied. "It is about possibilities. The Devourers have never encountered consciousness like yours. They cannot predict what you will do, because you do not know what you will do until the moment you do it. This unpredictability is a weapon more powerful than any force they have faced." Jake looked out at the stars and tried to believe that was true. In 3 months, they would face the Devourers in battle for the first time. Everything depended on humanity's ability to be impossibly, chaotically, unpredictably human. The alarm that woke Jake Morrison was unlike any sound he had ever heard. It wasn't the harsh electronic screech of a normal ship's warning system, but something deeper and more urgent, like the cry of a living creature in pain. He rolled out of his bunk and ran toward the bridge, knowing without being told that the waiting was over. "Captain," Amy called out as he entered the command center, "we're getting reports from the outer colonies. The Devourers have broken through the defensive lines at Kepler's Edge. They're heading straight for the core systems." Jake felt his stomach drop as he looked at the tactical display. Red markers showed the advancing enemy, consuming everything in their path. Behind them lay only empty space where star systems had once existed. Ahead lay the heart of galactic civilization, including Earth itself. "How many ships do we have ready?" he asked. 14 vessels with human operators, Pete replied from his engineering station. "Not nearly enough to stop what's coming, but it's all we have." The navigator's voice filled the bridge with calm authority. "Captain Morrison, the time has come to implement the final protocol. Are you prepared to link all human-operated vessels into a single consciousness network?" Jake had hoped they wouldn't need to use the most dangerous option available to them. The consciousness network would amplify their unpredictable human nature across the entire galaxy. But the risks were enormous. If something went wrong, they could unravel the fabric of reality itself. "What are our chances if we don't try the network?" he asked. "The Devourers will consume the galaxy within 6 months," the navigator replied without emotion. "Conventional resistance has failed at every encounter. The network is our only remaining option." Jake looked around at his crew, the people who had become his family during their months of training together. Amy was monitoring long-range sensors, her face pale but determined. Pete was running diagnostics on systems that responded to his emotions rather than his technical knowledge. Dan was coordinating communications with the other human ships, speaking in the new hybrid language of thought and technology that they had all learned. "Send the signal to all ships," Jake decided. "We're going to try something that has never been attempted before. We're going to make the impossible possible, because that's what humans do best." The battle began at the edge of the Centauri system, where the combined fleets of a dozen alien species had gathered to make their final stand. Jake watched through 7-9 Alpha's sensors as massive warships from the Vorthan Empire opened fire on the approaching Devourers. Their crystal-based weapons should have been capable of destroying planets, but the energy beams simply disappeared when they touched the enemy vessels. "They're adapting in real time," Lisa reported from her gunship. "Every weapon that hits them becomes useless after the first shot. The Devourers are learning how to absorb or deflect anything we throw at them." Jake felt the familiar tingling sensation that meant 7-9 Alpha was preparing to do something impossible. "All human vessels, prepare to engage. Remember, don't think about what you're doing. Just do it." The 14 human ships moved into formation, but not in any pattern that would make sense to a military strategist. Amy navigated by following her intuition, appearing in locations that felt right rather than tactically sound. The other ships followed similar patterns, creating a chaotic dance that had no logical structure. "Weapons ready," Sarah called out from her position. "But Captain, I'm not sure what my guns want to shoot. They keep changing their minds about what kind of ammunition to use." "Let them decide," Jake replied. "Trust the technology to know what it needs to do." The first exchange of fire between humans and Devourers defied all conventional understanding of space combat. 7-9 Alpha's weapons fired beams of solid music that somehow punched holes through enemy shields. Lisa's ship launched projectiles that grew larger as they traveled, becoming planet-sized by the time they reached their targets. Ben's vessel shot clouds of sparkling dust that turned into swarms of mechanical butterflies when they contacted enemy hulls. The Devourers reacted with confusion for the first time in their existence. They tried to adapt to the human weapons, but each shot was different from the last. There was no pattern to learn, no consistent technology to counter. The weapons changed their fundamental nature based on the emotions and whims of their human operators. "It's working," Dan reported with amazement. "They can't figure out how to defend against us because we don't know what we're going to do next." But the Devourers were numerous beyond counting, and even impossible weapons could only do so much against overwhelming numbers. For every enemy ship they destroyed, 10 more appeared to take its place. Jake realized they needed to implement the consciousness network before they were overwhelmed. "All ships prepare for network linkage," he announced. "This is going to feel very strange." The navigator guided the process, connecting the minds of all 14 human crews into a single shared consciousness. Jake felt his awareness expand beyond his own body, beyond his own ship, until he could think with the combined creativity of every human in the fleet. The effect was immediate and dramatic. The human ships began operating as a single organism, their weapons and defenses coordinating in ways that transcended normal space-time limitations. Jake felt Amy's navigation skills merge with his tactical instincts, felt Pete's emotional understanding of technology blend with Sarah's creative weapon control. But the network did more than enhance their combat abilities. It began affecting the fundamental nature of space itself around them. Stars flickered and changed color as human imagination touched them. Asteroids transformed into clouds of singing crystals. The vacuum of space filled with impossible colors that existed only because the linked human minds believed they could. The Devourers found themselves fighting not just enemy ships, but reality itself turned chaotic and unpredictable. Their adaptive abilities meant nothing when the laws of physics kept changing, based on human whim and fancy. Weapons that fired backward through time destroyed them before they had even been built. Shields made of crystallized laughter protected the human fleet from attacks that existed in 17 dimensions simultaneously. In the end, the Devourers did something they had never done in their eons of existence across countless galaxies. They retreated. Faced with an enemy that made no sense and operated by no consistent rules, they fled back toward the empty darkness between galaxies. Jake felt the consciousness network slowly dissolving as the immediate threat passed. He found himself back in his own body, on his own ship, surrounded by his crew who looked as dazed and amazed as he felt. "Did we actually win?" Amy asked quietly. "We survived," the navigator replied, "and we showed the galaxy something it had never seen before. Humans have become the guardians of the impossible, the protectors of chaos in an ordered universe." Jake looked out at the stars, which were slowly returning to their normal colors after the reality storm caused by the consciousness network. Humanity had saved the galaxy not through superior technology or military might, but by refusing to accept that anything was truly impossible. "So what happens now?" Pete wanted to know. Jake smiled and settled back into his captain's chair. "Now we explore the galaxy and find out what other impossible things are waiting for us to discover them."